The Dark Room. A long time ago, a young woman moved into a new apartment. She was excited about her new life, but soon she noticed something strange in her room. An object on the table that secretly moved. The girl thought it was just the wind, but stranger things began to happen. She would fall asleep, but as soon as she closed her eyes, she felt someone's hands creeping toward her. One day, she decided to investigate. She turned off the lights and noticed the room was in complete darkness. She began to feel along the walls to find the switch, when suddenly something touched her face. The girl screamed, and her parents, who heard her cries, rushed into the room. Later, the police arrived to inspect the entire apartment. They found nothing but a fairly empty room, with no signs of any moving objects. But the girl always felt that she was not alone in her room, and she never dared to stay alone with that stranger in the dark space again.
The Labyrinth of the Red House. The secret behind the red door. On the outskirts of New York City stood an old house, strikingly different from its surroundings. Built with red bricks, it had been abandoned for years, but was now up for sale. Chris, a desperate real estate agent drowning in debt, was eager to sell it quickly. Who would even buy this place? He muttered to himself, unlocking the front door. Inside, it was clear no one had been there for decades. Dust-covered furniture, strange writings on the walls, and mirrors everywhere immediately caught his attention. The house had no known history, except for one strict condition: never stay in this house after midnight. Selling the house proved difficult. Chris's last hope was Molly, a journalist who investigated mysterious events. Intrigued by the rumors, Molly agreed to interview Chris and visit the house. "These are just legends," Chris told her inside the house. "But I really need to sell this place. My debts?" He trailed off. "All right," Molly said as she looked around. "But something feels off here. What do you know about these strange things?" Chris hesitated before pointing to the bizarre writings on the wall. They were ancient Latin phrases. "Every mirror hides a world." At 11 p.m., Molly and Chris stayed in the house. Molly was curious, while Chris was uneasy about staying for too long. When they began examining the mirrors, they realized they weren't reflecting the room accurately. Each mirror showed a different world: barren landscapes, eerie huts, and a mysterious figure watching them from afar. Suddenly, the images in the mirrors started to move. "These aren't reflections," Molly whispered. "These are living worlds." From one of the mirrors, a shadow seemed to emerge. Chris stepped back, but Molly, intrigued, moved closer. Entering the labyrinth. When the clock struck midnight, the doors of the house creaked shut. Every room suddenly began to look identical. Molly and Chris tried to find their way out, but each door led to another room filled with mirrors. "This house is alive," Molly said. "The only way out might be through the mirrors." They decided to follow the shadow they had seen earlier. Approaching one of the mirrors, the shadow spoke. "One of you must stay behind. The other can leave, but only one." The choice. Every passing minute in the labyrinth drained their energy. The mirrors began separating Molly and Chris. In one mirror, Chris saw a twisted version of himself smiling and speaking. "You can't escape. Only I will make it out." Molly, in another mirror, saw a crowd of shadows reaching for her. She tried to run, but felt the walls closing in. Chris made the final decision. He tricked his reflection and attempted to escape the labyrinth, but the condition was clear. Only one person could leave alive: the new owners. When Molly woke up, she found herself outside the house, dazed. Chris, however, was nowhere to be seen. The house remained unsold, its legend unchanged. When the house chooses a new owner, it closes its doors to the world again. Molly left the house behind, but she never saw Chris again.
The Secret Beneath the Snow. In a small, lesser-known Alaskan town called Swan Valley, People had always been accustomed to harsh winters and constant snowstorms, but this year was colder than usual. Sophie sat by the old library stove, holding a warm teapot in her hands, when Jackson rushed in, his sudden entrance making her instinctively pull back. "What brings you here in this weather?" Sophie asked. There was something on Jackson's face. Was it amazement or fear? "There are tracks under the snow," he said breathlessly, brushing the frost off his beard. "And they're not normal." Sophie tried to smile, but a strange feeling stirred inside her. She'd heard of such tracks before, in old stories from her childhood. The beast's tracks. Jackson and Sophie ventured to the outskirts of town to see the tracks. Under the snow, they found something unsettling, massive three-toed prints stretching for miles. Were they left by a wild beast? Or was it the product of local folklore? Jackson whispered, "These aren't just stories, Sophie. We've stopped talking about it for a reason. It must not wake up." Sophie looked at him skeptically but couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She remembered reading about a creature in the old library books that left tracks like these. The awakening. The next day, terrifying events began unfolding in the town. Locals couldn't figure out where the tracks were coming from, but people started disappearing one by one. An old book described how the strange creature awakens with the winter cold and begins taking people. It could only be stopped by a human sacrifice. Jackson made a firm decision. "I'll put an end to this. If it comes to it, I'll offer myself." Sophie protested, but Jackson's plan to sacrifice himself seemed to be the only way to save the town. The final night. The night was dark, and the storm raged stronger than ever. Sophie and Jackson ventured far from the town to lure the creature away. When it finally appeared, a towering figure made entirely of snow and ice, it closed in on them, and Jackson saw no other option. A new dawn. By morning, the storm had subsided, and the town was calm once again, but Jackson did not return. Sophie knew deep down that this was not the end of the legend. One day, the creature would rise again,